Alrighty. Ooh. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. Sorry we're starting off a little bit late, but we had another student here that was doing their final presentation for their course. So I didn't want to start the session until that portion was done for the student. So let's go ahead and start our presentation here. So again, my name is Kwana Yazi. My Yijin Shlin Nash Ejdana Bashishchin Athinash Chedo, the Bethlehem Dashinala. I am from Rock Point, Arizona, and I'm one of the professional writing tutors here at the Net College. So today, what we actually have for you, what I actually have for you today is what I call the art of revision. And we're gonna hit sort of three different areas today. So, this presentation here is gonna sort of be like a review of literally all of the information that we have covered from the very beginning of finals countdown to currently our last session from yesterday in writing. So we'll sort of hit all of those areas and combine them to see how you can look at your paper from a different view and look at how you can look at things or take into consideration what you can do on your own when you're going to be revising your paper and stuff like that. So a lot of this might be some kind of like a review or something like that, right? So if you have any questions anywhere, uh, feel free to mute, unmute. You can interrupt me if you want to, or use the chat box. It's really up to you. But just as I said, this will be some kind of like review of everything that has been discussed since finals countdown for the writing portion. And this is our last session. This is the last session of finals countdown. So thank you guys again for participating throughout the entire week and a half. I really, really enjoyed this event. I really, really hope it was insightful. Hopefully it was, helpful for you as well, informative as well for you so that, you don't struggle during finals and, things like that. That was the whole point of this event. And, I just want to thank all of the presenters, um, the Learning Center for hosting this event and everyone, of course, for participating. So I just want to say thank you again. So we'll go ahead and get right to it. So the art of revision, we're going to be hitting three areas here. And, these three things that you see on the screen, revising, editing, and proofreading, they all sound the same, right? They all technically sound the same, but they're actually totally very different things. And we're going to hit three of those areas where, you can jot down on your notes or somewhere, areas that you can look at when you're going to be revising a final paper or, within your research process or anything like that. Things to take into consideration when you're going through your papers for revision. So when we start to look at revision specifically, right? Here, within this revising stage, when you revise, you attend to large scale aspects of text. So we're focusing on organization and style here. So you do this once you have that first draft. So when you're given a writing assignment or writing prompt, and then you outline it and then you write out your first paper, that first draft, you want to come back to it first before you do anything else with the smaller things. So you want to focus on organization first. And within this stage, you guys should all know by now, this is where we focus on, these things here. So we have essay organization and structure, essay patterns, thought patterns, and in some cases, the rhetorical triangle and appeal to your audience, right? And these are the things that were covered during this whole finals countdown. So we'll hit these four things first for revising. So for revising, the most crucial thing to know before moving on with your paper, after you have that first draft, after you have an outline, you want to look at its organizational structure, which is super, super important. That's the first thing I look at when I look at papers from students, is look at how your information is structured, look at how information is flowing together, how are things working together and stuff like that. That's the first thing to do before you go into, grammar, spelling errors and stuff like that. That you can leave that alone first, but focus first on structure, which is super important. And that's the only way you can get your point and your purpose across to your reader is through organizational structure. So here, in this first stage, revising with essay organization and structure, we have this base structure that's already out there. And this is for the basic essay that's out there, right? Within an essay, you want an introduction, of course, you want the body of work, and a conclusion. It's a three-part process of the essay structure. So within the intro, you want these things here: hook sentence, background, summary, thesis statement. Within your body of work, which can become more than 3 paragraphs if you want, more paragraphs if you want, even more. Just depends on how much information you're going to be including within your paper itself. I put essay here, but this can pertain to research as well. Research always has to have an introduction, all of the research itself, and then concluding information, right? So introduction, you want hook sentence, background, summary information, a thesis statement, of course, and then body work, which can become multiple paragraphs. Within the paragraph itself, you want a topic sentence, supporting details, and then transition sentences between those paragraphs so that you're flowing information and connecting them together. In conclusion, you want to reinstate all of your main points, reinstate your thesis statement, which is your claim, and then end with the conclusion sentence. The conclusion sentence can be like a call to action if you're doing like an argumentative paper, right? You can say like, because of my argument, I want you to believe this, we should do this, this is where you offer solutions and stuff like that in the conclusion. So this is important, is putting everything in this type of structure here. It can work with any type of writing, essay or research paper. And the most crucial thing within this stage here is this thesis statement. And sometimes students overshadow the placement of a thesis statement. You can place a thesis statement within the introduction as an implied statement where you don't actually state it, but you imply it within the introduction itself. So you imply it by introducing the topic, the summary, and then introducing a problem within that portion there, which becomes an implied thesis statement. We just assume that you're going to be talking about that specific topic. And then the other thing is just simply stating the thesis statement, which is a stated thesis statement. So there's 2 ways to put the thesis statement within the essay or research. But coming down to the thesis statement, just for basic structuring of a thesis statement, there's like totally a whole bunch of different ways to put a thesis statement into text, context. So you have this base formula you see at the very top: topic, controlling idea, and supporting details, right? Topics, controlling idea, and supporting details. In some other words, with like research or other complex types of works, you can use, change the topic to like claim, and then add a reasoning and add evidence. And then same thing with like, if you have an issue you want to talk about, what's your stance on that issue, and then your corroboration. So these things here on the far right are the most common thing. They're all similar because they're all evidence, they're all proof, they're all supporting details of this controlling idea, which is the same thing as reasoning, which is the same thing as stance. And then the topic is the same thing as a claim and as an issue. So these here is just the general topic, what it is. Now, what do we want to do with the topic itself? Do we want to argue about something? Do you want to compare and contrast? Do you want to analyze it? Those kind of things happen within the middle here, these middle elements that you see here. So everything about the topic that you want to do becomes this controlling idea, this reasoning, this stance. Then you support that with your evidence, basically. So you need those type of 3 things within any type of thesis statement in order for it to sort of flow within your essay itself. Because what you have here within this entire thesis statement, everything within that thesis statement is going to be talked about within the essay itself. So you can, most essays, they do like 3 supporting details, right? You can list those 3 supporting details within the topic, within the thesis statement itself. And those 3 supporting details become those 3 paragraphs that you just saw a while ago. So, thesis statement is super important here. So in order for us to, write what kind of thesis statement should we write, what kind of structure should I have and stuff like that, right? We need to know what essay pattern we'll have, or research patterns in this case. And what you see on this far left here, these are the most common ones, and these are the ones you see like in English 101, right? Barely, coming into English courses, and you're learning how to process information and learn how to, find a style and find a tone within your work, right? That's what we do here. So narrative, we talk about our stories. Argumentative, we're learning how to argue for something, for our stance. Expository, we want to explain something very descriptive. Same thing with descriptive, use descriptive words, compare and contrast a process essay, which we can talk about how to make fry bread or something like that, right? And then definition, defining a word, defining a concept, defining a phrase or something like that, analyzing a phrase. That's what we do within definition essays. Then cause and effect, persuasive essays, illustration to make a point of something, profile, talking about someone, like a biography of some sort. So this is what we learn first. And then later on, within English 102 and going forward into the more advanced English courses, that's when we start to add things like research, analysis, and review, right? So we have research, analysis, and review. That's when we start to outsource, sort of not outsource, but bring in more information from the internet and read a lot and stuff like that. So these things here on the left, they're present within this left side of this Venn diagram that we have. And then we start to incorporate research, analyses, reviews, and stuff like that. And that's what we, most instructors tend to come up with different types of works and different types of assignments for you, which then become things like this, like argumentative research, right? We're taking argumentative, we're taking research, we're combining it. Now we're going to do that as an assignment to combine those two types of different works. Then like persuasive research, a literary review, rhetorical analysis, there's a whole bunch of different works that can actually just be created within English or within any type of assignment that's being given to you. And these all spring back to that Bloom's taxonomy of how instructors want you to learn a lot of this information, right? So that's where this is coming from on the right side of the Venn diagram, is Bloom's taxonomies, learning theories. That's when they attached them to these essay patterns. All right, so the next slide here, coming back to, knowing the type of essay, knowing the type of research, any type of assignment that you're given, right? You can then start to place them within these essay structures that are out there. And as an example, if you're doing like a literary review, right, which is, a part of the body of work, usually most common in researches, right? Because in research, that's when you start to bring in sources that you want to include. And within a literary review portion, that's when you're combining and you're analyzing, you're summarizing all of those sources that you're going to be using in your paper. That's what a literary review is. So let's say you have 6 sources here, what you see on the screen, you have 6 sources. Now, what do you want to do with each of those sources? You can put in this order if you want to. You can talk about source 1, source 2, source 3, all the way down to source 6. And then that can become the structure of a literature review. Or you can do things like, talk about the similarities first, and then talk about the differences of all the sources. This is another structure. Or you can do like, put them in order, like source 1 is the least important. I'll talk about that first and how it's relative to my research. And then all the way down to source 6, which is my most important source. I'll talk about that last because that's the most relevant and the most useful for my entire research. Things like that, right? It's really up to you and how you envision your paper will come across other people on the other side that are reading your work. So it's up to you to think about how you're going to interpret the information to your reader, which comes back to that same theory of, learning theories of Bloom's taxonomy, right? Which is what we covered in one of our presentations during this week. So taking perspective of other people, how do you think they can read your information? Which brings us to, thought patterns, right? This was another thing that we covered within our presentation, right? So here within thought patterns, we want to understand how everyone else thinks. Again, your audience, how do they think about your information that you're putting out there? And when you're putting information together, these are the types of what we call orders that you can put the information in. And again, remember, like I said, there's a whole bunch of thought patterns out there, a whole bunch of different ways people think, but these are the most common ones that we usually come across all the time. So like emphatical order, we can organize information from least to most important, or opposite, most important to least important, really up to you. And then we have space order or spatial order, when you're using descriptive words and directional phrases and stuff like that, right, to put the reader within the context of your work. So if you were like doing a descriptive essay and you want to bring the reader in to imagine that they're standing in your spot, looking like to my left, I have like this mountain, beautiful mountain, stuff like that, right? You're using descriptive words and using your 5 senses, you're putting your reader into this space, like imagining that they are actually there with you and they know what's around them, what's surrounding them and stuff like that. So that's what space order is. And you can also put essays in like time order, which is like history reports, process essays, like doing a process, right? Putting them in order by time. So organizing information in chronological order. And then topical order, when you're taking a topic and splitting them into subtopics or groups, which is the most common. This is the most common thought pattern that we use as usual, right? And then causal order is the cause and effect kind of thing. Discusses information that is caused by other information. So just as a review again, thought patterns are important as well. So then when we go into, just thinking about the information that we just stated, right? Now we want to take into consideration how on our end, how we can, bring the reader to us, right? So now we're thinking about our reader on their perspective. Now we're going to think about us here, how we can bring them into our research. And remember, we went through these stages as well, talking about the concepts of ethos, pathos, and logos. So ethos is an appeal to credibility, right? And within the ethos stage, we want to involve, a credible person. This is a person. Ethos is a person, a speaker, which you see there on the paradigm. When you look at that, the ethos portion is the speaker. You want someone that's credible, that people can believe the information that's coming from them, so that they believe the information. And pathos, an appeal to emotion, right? Trying to hook the reader using emotional words, using emotional times that have occurred, try to hit the reader in a way that they can become emotional to believe what you're saying. And then logos, an appeal to logic, right? Using a lot of statistics, logical information, data, which is the most common of what we use, right? Logos. And then that's the only thing I wanted to cover there with the revising portion, right? The revision stage, or was it editing? So now within this portion here, the editing portion, this is where we're focusing on a lot more little things. So here, the editing stage, this is when your overall argument or claim, so your structure and organization is all perfect. You like the way information is flowing. Now we're going to shift our attention to grammar, which is dissecting it even more, looking at sentence structures, verb tenses, looking at subject-verb agreement, and all the way down, right? And the ones that I want to cover, there's a whole bunch of different things that you can consider when you're going to be revising or editing, in this case, editing your paper. But I just wanted to bring out the common ones that I see when I do editing among students' papers. So we'll be looking at these 4 areas here: person language, verb tenses, style and voice, and sentence structures. So person language, as we all know, right? Looking at this table here, first, second, third, singular and plural. Some it really depends on the type of essay or research that you're doing. But typically, if you're doing research for a science course, or an NIS course if you're enrolled in one, any type of research basically like that's an APA format or something like that, you want to use third person all the time, third person, because here within third person, you're just stating the facts and you're not letting it become subjective to people around you or to yourself. Because typically when we use subjective language in research, it doesn't sound professional because we're involving our own opinions or other people's opinions, and we don't want that in research. So within research specifically, we want to shy away from first and second, but inherit a third person language. So then it becomes like we're stating the facts and stuff like that. But on the other hand, when we're working with, essays, English courses and stuff like that, we can shift between all three of these actually, right? Because if it's a narrative essay, we would be using I and me or we and us, talking about stories and stuff like that. And, there's a difference between which person to use and stuff like that. I included this fourth person because I thought it would be useful for like Navajo writing, because in Navajo writing, we have a fourth person, which is the prefix or the pronouns of ho, right? Ho, both of them are both singular and plural, ho. So, depending on the type of word, the type of verb that you're going to be using, you'll constantly see ho within singular and plural of fourth person in the Navajo language. Some say like H-O-C-H, stuff like that. But the fourth person in the Navajo language comes from, it's sort of like this existence of something, like, the verb itself. Third, first person, it's myself doing it. Second person is them doing it. Third person is just them doing it. And then fourth person is like, no one's attached to it, but it's just an existence of the verb. There's a verb happening, so there's action happening, but we don't know who's actually doing it, right? So it's like just an existence of a verb. That's how this fourth person works in the Navajo language. So that's important, is person language. Knowing what kind of person language you have within your essay is important. All right, the next thing we want to cover is verb tenses. So this one's also common within editing. And when I see this, I usually underline them or circle them throughout the entire essay, because we want to stay consistent with using verbs with their tenses as well, knowing the past, present, and future. Because when you shift between those verbs, you're shifting the story along with itself. So you're shifting from another time to another time. And time is important in the way you, talk about different information. So here, some readers can get confused with those sudden shifts in time when you're using the wrong verb tense or something like that, right? So what I would encourage you to do when you're going through your edits is to circle or underline all of your verbs within the essay itself, and then look at how information are shifting through time. Sometimes we want to talk about the past, right? So everything should be in the past within that entire portion. Then when we come back to present tense, we want everything to be in present tense. There's that shift that can happen between time that students can overlook, and it can be confusing as well. So looking at this example here, Jenna wrote me about her Farmington trip. She sees people dining at restaurants. Don't worry about that, during COVID-19. So what's happening here is that there's two different time shifts that are happening between these two clauses. So when we highlight them, I'm gonna delete that again. Jenna wrote me about her Farmington trip, which is in past tense, right? You wrote me, but now she shifts to sees, which is present tense. So we have a past, then we have a present tense. So when you see something like that, we don't necessarily want that kind of information, that sudden shift between time, because that becomes confusing and can become grammatically incorrect. So what we can do is just, choose a tense Well, in this case, we'll just change this one to saw, which then makes this whole sentence in the past tense. So this would be a grammatically correct sentence. You know, this can be overlooked like all the time. So you need to go back into your essay and look for these kind of things as well. And sometimes we need to change between time when we're introducing new information or mixing information. And sometimes you can change between these tenses, right? So if you're taking a look at this whole passage here, I'm gonna highlight the important parts. So you have, for parents who worry that their children will never eat again or never eat anything but chocolate milk, gummy vitamins, and the occasional grape, a new study offers some relief. Researchers examined the eating habits of 5,390 pairs of twins between 8 and 11 years old and found children's aversions to trying new foods are mostly inherited. The message to parents, it's not your cooking, it's your genes. So if we were to look at this and start to analyze it, you know, in the beginning of the sentence, the passages, we're starting with present tense, right? For parents who worry that their children, we shift to future tense right here, actually, will never eat anything, which we're providing insight to the future. And then, but a new study offers some relief. Offers comes back to present tense, right? And then we suddenly shift to past tense. And that's because of our transition from the previous sentence, because we're going to be talking about something, a new study that offers some relief, right? Which of course, logically would have happened back in the past. So the study occurred already, so we want to talk about that in the past. So if you were to dissect this entire passage, this is how it would be color-coded. So we started with present tense. We want to talk about the future. We come back to present tense, which that second lime green one offers a transition to the past because we're going to be talking about a study that has occurred. So then now we're going to talk about the study, which should all be in past tense because that study happened already in the past, right? So you see how like time is literally shifting between all of these tenses. And we need to sort of keep that in mind when we're going through editing as well. The verb tenses are important. All right, so then the next thing is looking at style and voice. And the most common one, the most important one I want to talk about is active and passive voice. This can sometimes become confusing because, you know, sometimes it's hard to identify it. So if you have active versus passive, we're looking at these two voices. Active voice means that a sentence has a subject that acts upon its verb versus passive voice, which the subject becomes a recipient of a verb's action. Yeah, so if we look at it here, just some background information, you know, when we're doing research, any type of research for science, for NIS courses or anything like that, we want to shy away from, well, most research, we don't want this passive voice. Because sometimes when you use a lot of passive voice, are sort of, it can come like not interesting, become so bland and like boring. You know, just the way passive voice can sound, we kind of want to stay away from that, rather use active voice, which we'll look at some examples here. So if we were to look at the difference between these active voice, right? And the first one, active voice, is the subject is doing the verb, right? So we have the subject, chipmunks. They are adoring pinions. So chipmunks are adoring pinions. So it's acting upon the verb versus this passive voice, the chipmunks or the adored is acting upon the subject. So we see the difference between these two. So chipmunks adore pinions, but the pinions are adored by chipmunks. So it's actually really coming this way like this. Yeah, it's coming this way like that, kind of like reverse. And if you were to look at this like research based, if we were to look at a sentence that looks at it like research, this could be an example here. Look at the difference between these two voices. So surgeons discovered a new experimental liver transplant operation. A new experimental liver transplant operation was discovered, right? And this was discovered is where that passive voice is happening, because, you know, the transplant or the operation was discovered. So the was discovered is acting upon this operation, right? Versus the active voice where, you know, surgeons discovered, the subject discovered a new experimental liver transplant, right? So if you were to just read this, when you're reading through research, you can really, sometimes it's hard to identify, but sometimes it's easy to sort of identify, because you most commonly run into like was discovered or has happened. What else is there? There's like has happened, you know, was conducted. You know, we're not involving like a subject in this passive voice, not necessarily, because we're just saying, oh yeah, it just happened. But versus this kind of voice, the active voice, we're actually incorporating subjects, and we're incorporating this sort of active voice like it's actually currently happening, but it's in the past. So that's one of the things there too. It can be confusing, identifying active voice versus passive voice. But that's a huge thing. If you want to learn more about this, you can go literally just research it online, because sometimes it can get confusing how you can structure sentences based off of subjects and no subjects and stuff like that. So the editing stage, the last portion within this editing portion, is looking at sentence structures. And this here is another biggest part of, you know, things that I see all the time within editing papers, is knowing how sentences can fit together, knowing what a run-on is or how run-ons occur, things like that, right? And in order for us to go into these sentences here, this portion, we have to know what an independent clause and what a dependent clause is, which we'll go through. And then we'll go through some examples of these different types of sentence structures. So the first thing is an independent clause. So it is literally something that is independent, can stand alone. It can stand alone by itself. So if we're looking at the formula for an independent clause must include a subject and a predicate. A predicate is just, it just means that something the subject is doing, basically, right? So looking at these two examples here, the cell was large and unevenly shaped, and Adriana bikes. So looking at those two sentences, if we were to color code it, this is what we would get. So the cell is the subject, and then was large and unevenly shaped is the predicate. So the subject is doing what the predicate is doing, right? And Adriana is the subject. What is the subject doing? They're biking. So Adriana bikes. So this is a complete sentence. This is a complete sentence here. Independent clauses are complete sentences. And then we move into dependent clauses, which is something that is dependent and cannot stand alone. So in this case, we're taking the same formula, subject plus predicate, but looking at those sentences at the very bottom, they're just the predicates, but there's no subjects. And in most cases, this is, you know, a grammatically incorrect sentence, a dependent clause. It's not a sentence at all, but independent clauses, these are sentences. You have to have a subject and a predicate, but dependent clauses typically won't have a subject or they won't have a predicate. So here with these two examples, we would have to add a subject to them to make them grammatically correct. But in some cases, we can add different things to make a predicate a complete sentence, which we'll go into as well. So the main thing we want to focus on here is knowing what an independent clause is, complete sentence, and then knowing what a dependent clause, which is not a complete sentence, right? So knowing those two things, we can take a look at sentence structures themselves. So the first one, or all of them specifically, these are all the types of sentences that are out there. We have a simple sentence, which is just an independent clause. We have compound sentences, which combine independent clauses. You can do two. And then complex sentences that involve an independent clause and a dependent clause. And then we have compound complex sentences that include an independent and a dependent, and then plus another independent. Anything else that you don't see on here, they're going to be totally not complete sentences. So these are the only recognizable sentence structures that we have in English language. So these are super important here. So we'll go into all of these four very specifically. So not necessarily simple sentences, because this is basically the same thing as an independent clause. So you have to have a subject and predicate, right? But looking at compound sentences, this is where we can involve independent clauses plus another independent clause. So a way to do that, a way to master combining independent clauses is using, a semicolon here, or using a comma, just a comma, not necessarily but yet, but you can use a comma as well to separate them. And then in some cases, you can use a comma, and then add a conjunction, coordinating conjunction, which becomes right in between the independent clauses. And then in some cases, you can use a semicolon along with the subordinated conjunction. So these are four ways that you can use to split independent clauses or combine them, and they will be grammatically correct. So you can see these examples here. For this first one, this cell was large, right? If we were to just look at that sentence alone, that's an independent clause. It has a subject and it has a predicate, was large. So this is a complete sentence, so it's an independent clause. And then it could attach to the molecule, it is the subject, and then could attach to the molecule as a predicate. So that's a complete sentence. So we're using two complete sentences, and we're using a semicolon here to split them because they're both the same idea. So that's the only rule there with using semicolons, is if the first sentence is an independent clause, but the second one is a continuing idea of the first sentence, right? So we're still talking about the cell, but we're going to continue on with the sentence. Same thing down here, same sentence, same idea, but we're using a conjunction to split them. So we have but, this should be a comma right here, but yeah, but, comma, but, then continuing on. Same thing down here with the subordinated conjunction, splitting it with the semicolon, using a conjunction here, and then continuing the sentence. So there's like four different ways to combine compound sentences, combine independent clauses. All right, so these are complete sentences, just so you know, complete sentences plus another complete sentence. So then the next one is complex sentences. So here, remember we have an independent verse plus a dependent. And the way to split those are using commas. You can switch the position of both of them. You can also add them within the sentence itself, as you will see there. But coming back to this first one, the bicycle is missing. This is a complete sentence by itself without looking at the second part. But if we were to look at this one here, which was in the street, we don't know what the subject is, right? So that's why this is a dependent clause, and this can't stand alone, the dependent clause itself. So we can combine them with an independent clause if they're from the same, if they're the same idea. We can use that comma there to split them, right? And then the same thing, we can switch both of them up. We can use a dependent clause after it rains, which is not a complete sentence. And then we will go for a bike ride, is a complete sentence, splitting them with a comma splice. Then down here, in some cases, you can put a dependent clause within a independent clause. So you see that this dependent clause is coming in between whatever's in here. So you'll see that the dependent clause is here, but then the independent clause is all out here on the side. So if we were to just read, Pearl has won an art scholarship, that's the independent clause, right? But now we're putting the dependent clause within it. Who danced so elegantly has won an art scholarship. This can be used all the time when you're introducing like titles or credentials. So if you say like Pearl, who is a model or something like that, right? Who is a model, has won an art scholarship. So this is where we use that commonly. we separate them with commas. All right, so then the last one is compound complex sentences. And this one, it can totally be, sometimes it can change up a lot as well, but it's just a matter of using comma splices and things like that. So if we look at this one here, we're going to use that same example that we just did. We're putting the dependent clause within an independent clause, and then we're adding a totally different independent clause at the very end. So if we were to color code this one, this is how it would look. So remember, if we were, let's say we took this all out. Say we took that all out. So what happens here is that we're now combining, this becomes a compound sentence, right? Because we took out the complex part. Because we have young people had grown up during a time of optimism and change. We're using that comma with the conjunction and then continue on with another complete sentence. They believe in a living wage for workers, reduced corporate power, and equitably distributed wealth, right? So it's compound sentence right now. But now we can combine or incorporate the dependent clause within that first sentence, which this can become a compound complex sentence. And you can add a comma splice if you want here. Just like the previous example, you can do that. It will be grammatically correct as well. So there's a whole bunch of different ways you can combine these clauses basically, but it's knowing how, knowing the goal here is knowing what an independent clause is and knowing what a dependent clause is. Those two things there are really super important. So these two slides that you see here, independent and dependent clause. And then now you can, it'll become easier to combine those sentences and stuff like that. So that's a huge part too of, going through edits, is looking at sentence structures, looking at how you're introducing information and stuff like that. Because some people can, leave out the subject portion and not include a predicate and stuff like that, which becomes incorrect. And, they can add on more information after this, after using compound complex sentences. Adding more information here becomes a run-on, right? And, it's just a matter of just identifying the clauses within each sentence that you're producing. So that's important there as well. So again, these 4 sentences are the only ones that are recognized that should be used within writing. And then for proofreading, here in this stage, this is the very last stage, and this is the very last thing you should really focus on when it comes to revising papers and stuff like that, right? Because here, you're literally just looking at spelling, looking at how you're using punctuations, direct quotes, if you're using any, other little things such as like formatting and stuff like that, right? This is like the very, very last step you should focus on. Most of the time, students tend to spend so much time on this portion here, and they don't actually focus on like the very first stage, which is the most important, as I keep saying, organization and structure and things like that. They don't focus on that, but focus on this, which then when we look at their papers, we sort of go through the structuring portion and we tell them to restart the entire process and things like that. But, it's important to know that there is a process to revision, the art of revision, going through these 3 stages. So this would be the very last step, looking through spelling, punctuations, so common spelling errors if you have any, knowing acronyms, introducing acronyms, how to format numbers and stuff like that. Looking at stylistics of MLA, APA, Chicago style. So these are the 3 areas that are the very last thing to consider when you're going through revision. So conventions of standard English punctuation. So knowing how to use punctuations within your essay itself. So I think that's all I had for this presentation. So as you can see, it's sort of like a review, right? So first, within revising, or when you're going to start revising yourself, if you want to do it yourself, you want to look at structure first. Look at how you structure your paper. It should have an introduction, a body of work, and conclusion. Take a look at your essay patterns. What kind of style or what kind of tone should you be using? Look at thought patterns. How can you organize the information using thought patterns? Should it be in space order? Should it be in emphatical order? And taking consideration appeals to your audience, rhetorical triangle. Should I appeal to my audience with emotion? Should I use celebrity endorsements? Ethos, pathos, logos are important. And then editing, what person language should I use? Should it be in first person? Is this a narrative essay? Should I use first person language, second person language, third person language? Are my verb tenses correct? Are they all in past tense? Should I be writing in past tense, or should I be writing in the future? Style and voice, is it active voice or is it passive voice? Are there any passive voices within my research itself? Sentence structures. Let me look at my sentences. Are they grammatically correct? Do I have any run-ons? Am I combining independent clauses correctly, dependent clauses with independent clauses? What's happening there? And then lastly, after that, we go into editing. All right, let me take a look at my spelling errors. Do I have any spelling errors? Are some of these punctuations I'm using, are they correct? Are they not correct? What format should this all be in based off of my research? If it's research, I should put in APA. If it's a literature course, I can put in MLA, things like that, right? So we just went through the process just now, right? And there's a lot of things to consider, but if we keep practicing and practicing it, we'll totally master how to revise and proofread on our own. And, it's really, really cool to go through all of these little things on your own. And, it can become really interesting, and you'll understand how to write in the future and stuff like that. So once you master this, pretty much set to go with all of your English courses, that more advanced English courses, research papers and stuff like that. So these are the basics to mastering revising papers on your own, basically. So hopefully that was super informative and acts as a review from all of our presentations this past week. And yeah, that's all I have for you guys for today. So does anyone have any questions? No questions. All right, so with that, we have finally concluded our event for Finals Countdown. So again, I want to thank everyone that was involved with this entire project, this entire event with the Learning Center. I really appreciate all of the students that have stuck with us throughout this entire process from the very beginning, from last Wednesday on the 21st to currently now on the 30th. And, this was sort of something I wanted to do, we wanted to do as a group, to help prepare students for finals and to just keep their mind rolling, bring your minds back into, academics, and, consider a lot of these things that we talked about through these presentations for you guys to prepare and, not be so stressed, ease your anxiety levels, everything like that. So that was the whole goal of this event, and I really want to thank everyone that has been a part of it, our Learning Center tutors, our Learning Center staff, our managers, and it was a fun process, and we might be doing something like this again, beginning of fall semester, some sort of kickoff event to hook students in again, and just to review stuff, constantly review information, and just to help you guys, be as a guide to you guys to accomplish your goals, accomplish your academic goals, and to strive through college. So that was the whole entire goal of this event, and again, want to thank everyone for it. As far as the evaluations for today, Audrey will post that, and then again, we might be doing the drawing until Monday or Tuesday. A follow-up email will be headed out towards all of the students that participated, just to I think it'll be an email that counts sort of reminds you of how many events you attended, so which drawings you'll be entered in. So there is going to be a process here with the drawing. So all of the students that made, that attended 15 events, if you attended 15 events, you'll be entered into that $100 gift card drawing. And there's only one winner there. But since if there are more than 2 or 3 students that were in the 15 event category, if you don't win the 15 or the $100 gift card, you'll be automatically entered into the $50 one. Then we'll do the drawing there for 2 winners. If you don't win that one, then you'll be entered into the $25 one, which is 3 winners. So you'll have a whole bunch of chances to win a gift card if you are one of those people that attended the 15 event. So that's how that will go. And we'll probably record a video, and then we'll send that video out to all the participants to watch the video and see if you won. So that's how that will go. And yeah, so just make sure you fill out those evaluations, and those emails will be reminding you to fill out evaluations if you missed any of them, but you were participating. So yeah, again, thank you everyone for all of your support and all of your participation efforts. Again, from the bottom of my heart and stuff like that. So yeah, thank you guys again for joining us. Have a great rest of your day. Have a great weekend. Stay safe and good luck on your finals.